Things have really been getting crazy out there, and pretty quickly. If you look at kind of the way things have escalated with just this Russia-Ukraine conflict, you've had Russia put their nuclear arsenal on high alert. You've had them bring out supersonic missiles, which the U.S. still doesn't have, but both Russia and China have. And something that I think is a foretelling incident that happened late last year was Russia tested a satellite missile to take out one of their own satellites in outer space, and that caused a whole bunch of ruckus because of the space debris from blowing up that satellite that are now floating around in the orbit that we orbit satellites on. And that in and of itself should be concerning to you, because if those satellites were to blow up, it would be a very long time, if any, before we could get a satellite back out there because of the amount of space junk that would be floating around. It'd be nearly impossible to put a satellite back up in the same orbit. So there are a lot of things that I think you should be concerned about when it comes to communications, because those hypersonic missiles are completely capable of flying with a nuclear weapon on them. And when you hear people talk about EMPs, well, what is that? It's a nuclear weapon, essentially, that's been set off at a high altitude that causes an electromagnetic pulse and shuts down electronics. You and I and so many of us these days have forgotten the art of reading. And so we rely on communications not just to learn about things going on around the world, but also to educate ourselves on how to do things. I mean, the reality is that we have tied ourselves completely into electronics and our dependency on electronics. If those things go away tomorrow, we're completely screwed. We have nothing to rely on. And I think that as things escalate, you know, with the propaganda wars that are going on out there, the desperation that's been building out there, I think that there's a real possibility that you will see satellites shot down. I think that there's a real possibility, and like I said, if those satellites get blown up in outer space, that space junk is going to be floating around. They'll take out other satellites. I mean, it would be a disaster. It would be a disaster for society as we know it. It would take a very, very long time to get back online. And then the other threat, of course, is EMPs. If we end up in conflict with Russia or China, I guarantee you those two events would unfold. They would happen. They would take out satellites because they don't want people knowing what their movements are, what they're doing next. It's the only way to really be competitive in today's society when it comes to war, is to take out the satellites. They would also probably send up an EMP somewhere to try and destabilize a population, because if you can destabilize a population of people, you distract that government, and it weakens their ability to counter whatever it is that you're doing. So those are two things that I think that we should be very cautiously aware of, especially as it seems that we are constantly on this brink of World War III. And we keep getting closer year over year. Something happens where we get even closer to these events. And we've already seen countries demonstrate their capabilities and practice their capabilities. And they're not demonstrating and practicing those capabilities just as a deterrent. They're doing it so that they can make sure they have the ability to do so. And so I think that that is something that is very real that could happen. And even just with the current conflict, I think a satellite being taken out wouldn't be necessarily unfathomable. As countries try and get control over the internet, and they find that they can't eliminate their citizens from getting out and finding information elsewhere, they're going to eliminate the source. That's the only way to end up doing it. So what happens to people like you and I when that happens? What happens to your survival rate? It's going to drop dramatically because we don't have the ability to read anymore. I mean, we have the ability, it's just we don't have the books on hand. So what I wanted to do today is give you guys some ideas of how to build a library for survival. Some of these ideas you'll actually see in a Meet My Neighbor episode through our nonprofit coming out in the next week or two on the Secret Garden of Survival, because they are actually authors who have written some of the books I'm going to recommend to you. But these are all ideas to help you, and I'd appreciate any ideas you want to put down below to help you in the event that this happens, because you need to have the capability of continuing on with your life and being able to do things without that information resource from the World Wide Web that you so dependently depend on. I mean, think about it. You go to fix your car, you go to YouTube. You go to grow a plant, grow plants, start a garden. You go to YouTube, you learn from others. It's something we've done really, really well. And I like how the internet allows us to learn from a multitude of other people and not just a few select authors. But the reality is that we are moving in a direction where you need to have these resources readily available to you. Number one, if you have cars, an older car could very easily survive an EMP. Even a flashlight could survive an EMP. There's a lot of things that could survive an EMP. And certainly all of these things would still work if a satellite was taken out. It would just, things like GPS wouldn't work. So, but your ability to repair your car and keep your car on the road is going to change. And even now, I mean, this first recommendation is relevant just with the economy. As the prices of things going up, will start to impact your bottom line, you may need to have this resource just to do things on your own. And like I said, if the internet goes out, what tools do you have? Shop manuals are probably the most valuable thing you could have for anything, any small engine, any large engine, especially your vehicle, especially your means of transportation. So I would look for shop manuals. Those are the big, thick manuals that have everything you could possibly want to know about your vehicle in them. And I'm not talking about the small little ones from Tractor Supply or AutoZone. I'm talking about the big shop manuals. You'll have to go online and look for them. Now, my wife gave me a few books to bring up to you guys, and I think her book collection is going to be a little bit different than mine because we have different perspectives on what it is that we need to know in the event that something goes down. And it's not that the things that she feels are important or different importance to mine. It's just what she does on our farm and homestead and is different than what I do. Our focuses are different, and that everybody plays a role. So one thing that she has is the Family Garden Planner. Now this is mainly just a planning book, because what you want to do is you want to keep track of how much your family eats and how much your plants produce, so you know how many plants to produce in a season to be able to feed your family. This particular garden planner, I'll put a link down below, but you could probably find different types of garden planners. You could even make your own. It's kind of your own research study, but this particular one will even offer recommendations of how many potatoes you should plant per number of people in your family. But the purpose of these books is to help you keep track of that information, catalog it, so that you can continue to grow each and every year. And that's something, a lot of people don't think about, but it's an important thing to know. She also has the Handy Book of Knots. Now, I don't think she's ever opened this because I'm around and I know how to tie a lot of different knots. But this is a book that she felt was important to have in her library of books. It's paperback, something that I will say when it comes to building a survival library of sorts, it's good to have paperbacks, because in the event that you need to move, it's a lot easier to move paperback books than a bunch of hardback cover books. So this is in paperback, and it's actually kind of got a waterproof paperback design, but it has every knot in there she could possibly ever need to know in the event that I'm not around and something needs to be tied. I guarantee you there are knots in here that I don't know how to tie that could become useful to me if I'm in a situation where I need to learn how to tie something very specific or very special. So this is a great book to have in your collection. Now, Shauna also has a lot of identification books, from plant identification to animal identification. These are both plant identification. One is a field guide to wild edible plants. That could be extremely important, especially even today with just everything going on. Knowing what is naturally growing around you that you can eat. This is something everybody should have in their backpack. And then she's also got a field guide to medicinal plants and herbs. Same thing. What can you use that's growing around you? A field guide is showing you natural resources that are surrounding you. If you don't have these books on hand and the world goes to pot and you're not a plant expert, you could end up poisoning yourself, you could end up hurting yourself. These are extremely important to have on hand. We used to have the knowledge carried down from generation to generation, an immense amount of knowledge that was taught to the next generation coming up. We don't have that knowledge anymore. We haven't had to rely on it. There have been other things that have been more important. Luckily, you can get them in paperback books that are easy to transport, easy to take around. And this is the Peterson guides. If you guys know of another guidebook that's better, let me know. I'm not partial to any particular guide, but I think that everybody should know edible plants and medicinal plants. She also has a preserving food without freezing or canning book. Now, most of the preservation that we do on our farm is freezing. If it's meat, put it in the freezer. Vegetables you can put in the freezer, or we do canning. Both of those are methods that are fairly easy for us to do on a daily basis and get the materials to do. But if, for example, this fall, there are so many people growing plants and there's a jar shortage and you can't can, or they put a ration on how many jars, mason jars you can buy, or the other materials and equipment you need for canning, something like this could help you make use out of those crops so that they're not just going to waste. If electricity were to go out, massive inverters went down, you would be either depending on your access to fuel to operate a generator, what little bit of solar power you may have on your property, or you'll have to have other ways of doing things without having a freezer. So a book like this will help you learn to preserve food the way they did back in the 1700s, the 1600s, the 1500s, before there was electricity. There is a way to do it. It's not the end of the world if electricity goes down, but you've got to have the knowledge. And so, again, some of you may have a better suggestion for a book. The purpose of this book, though, is to just offer you a resource on preserving your food, saving your crop to make it through winter, in the event you can't can and you can't freeze. She's also got a book on herbs, and I guarantee you this book is probably very similar to the medicinal plant book, but this is going to have more recipes, more ways, directions on how to use it, directions on how to harvest it. And she's had, throughout the years, several books in her library that help her do things from, harvesting wheat to how to use it to, different recipes you can put it in. And you could get books written by authors that cover all sorts of topics from, lard to whatever it is that you want to learn how to use. If you have, part of the knowledge is learning how to implement it into recipes, learning how to utilize it. The other knowledge is learning how to harvest it. Now, I have a similar book to herbs or wheat or whatever it is that Shauna uses for bees. Let me grab that book real quick. And this is not paperback, neither is that herbs book. Not everything we have is paperback. I'm just saying paperback is generally better. But if the world went to pot, I probably wouldn't carry this around with me. It would probably be one of the few that I left behind if I had to move. But for being put, the Beekeeper's Bible is a fantastic book for beekeeping. Bees are important for self-sufficiency because you get wax from them. If there's no electricity, how are you going to have candles? This book will teach you how to make candles. It'll help you learn how to harvest the honey, harvest the wax, and utilize it in multiple different ways. So it has the recipes, it has everything you need to know about raising bees. And so if you're going to have bees on your property, having a resource like this that you can turn to instead of YouTube is extremely important. So I think that bees are a key element to having the abilities to survive. And so knowing how to manage them and knowing what to do with their product is important to me. Let's see. There are a few books here that I consider kind of basic books that I think everybody should have access to. One of them, ironically, is called Back to Basics. And you can get these fairly inexpensive. This is the second edition of Back to Basics, and I would suggest maybe going with one of the older editions of Back to Basics. These will teach you everything from framing a house to building a smokehouse to raising livestock. It's basically a book of all the basics you would need to form a productive homestead. I believe Wrangler Star actually had a video series a long time ago called Back to Basics, where he was just kind of building a bunch of things. But these are great resource guides to kind of give you knowledge and ideas. I don't think that this book is all conclusive. I don't think it has all of the information you would need. But you know what? If I had to go out and build something, I could come in here and at least learn how to timber frame off of it. And that might be all I have access to. So I feel like a Back to Basics book, we have the second edition, but one of the older editions is an extremely useful tool to have in your library. And even though this one is hardback and very large, it would probably be one of the books that I chose to carry with me in the event that we had to pack up and leave and travel. Another book that I would take with me is this book, Bushcraft 101. This teaches you so much. It's very elaborate, from everything from just backwoods survival skills, building fires, to sharpening. If you're not familiar with how to sharpen tools correctly, it has great instructions as far as that is concerned. Navigation tricks, how to build traps for trapping wildlife to eat. He even teaches you a little bit about how to butcher something that you've caught. It's called the ultimate resource for experiencing the backcountry. I have found this book to have a lot of knowledge and information. In fact, I've just kind of, on some occasions, sat around and read it, and have really enjoyed it. It also has a survival checklist of things that you should have in your survival pack, and I think that is something that we should all, be working on. It's a completely different video of how to put together a pack of things that you could grab if you had to on the go to get out there and survive in the wilderness. What I like about this book is he really minimalizes what you have to have. And he puts in this book how to survive off of what he minimalizes you to. So if you did absolutely have to go backpack only, couldn't carry a whole lot, if you had this book and all the items that he suggests, you've pretty much got your own guide that you can survive off of endlessly through this single book. So that is a great book. And honestly, a Boy Scout book has a lot of that information in it as well. Now, you'll notice this Boy Scout book predates my years in Boy Scouts. And the reason why I prefer this particular edition, which is, I don't even know what edition this is. It's from the 80s, the 9th edition. I always found, even when I was in Boy Scouts, I always found that this book had way more information in it on actual outdoor survival, lashing, building things, than the newer Boy Scout books, because the Scout program keeps up with the times. And so when you're looking at going back to a time of less modern amenities, having the older book just kind of gives you a little bit more of the skill and trades that you would need back in those older times. It even, it teaches you, for example, navigating off of the stars. You don't see that in a lot of handbooks today. So the old official Boy Scout handbooks are just a great way. I mean, some of this information in here is to the Boy Scout program and is completely useless, but they are great books. Probably not as thorough as the Bushcraft book, but also probably easier to understand for somebody that's just learning how to survive on their own. And with that, we also have a pamphlet. If you can find pamphlets on things, they're fantastic. Now, this is a very old pamphlet. It's a story pamphlet on how to build a smokehouse. But smokehouses are one way of preserving meat in the event that you don't have refrigeration. So this is a great little pamphlet to have, and it's small enough that you can fit it with your Bushcraft book, and now you've got an entire pamphlet on smokehouses versus just a few pages in a book. So a lot more information that you can get out of this. We also have pamphlets on all the wildlife in our area, all the mammals, all the snakes, all the bugs, and they're just, you know, from the local zoo or Wildlife Resources Commission. They're laminated. You can fold them up like having a map and stick it in your pack. And it's important to know, you know, because how many of you actually study wildlife and animals and know what their habits are or where their habitats are in the event that you need to hunt something? Do you even know where to look for it? And so that's where I think that having the knowledge of those animals and knowledge of their resources to you is useful. This is another one that I'll probably throw in there, you know, between, I would say, really between this book and this book, I could survive. The Basics of Butchering Livestock and Wild Game has everything in here from rabbits to deer to hogs to cows, you name it, chickens. There is nothing in here, and it has detailed pictures on how to do everything from skinning and even gets into some of the preservation. And as an added bonus, there's even a few recipes in the back if you don't know how to cook something that you just caught. So this is just a great book. It teaches you, you could read this book, you might get a little bloody, but you could read this book as you hunt and basically process an animal on your own for the first time. I think it's an invaluable book to have. We are going into a period of time where you need to have the resources on hand, and maybe you don't have time right now to learn to do it. Maybe you don't have time to go out and get trained. You don't have to have the time if you have a good resource in your hands that'll help you get there. Now, I would read through these books, and like this bushcraft book, and make sure that you have the supplies that you would need, because the book isn't going to do you any good if it's not accompanied with the proper tools. So the book is one step, reading at least through it to understand the tools that you would need, and getting those collected and with it is extremely important. You can do your learning later. Now, the authors that I told you about are actual preppers. They live out in the Appalachian mountain chain somewhere on a secret garden. They call it the secret garden of survival. And it's no longer just a garden, but they also have hogs and other livestock living on this property. And it's all hidden though. So one of the things that I think that we're going to run into in the future is, if there's a massive food shortage, and electricity goes out, if things go into chaos, there will be a period of time before the population cuts back dramatically, which it would likely do. Unfortunately, I hate talking about that stuff, but it would happen. There will be a period of desperation. And if you live on a farm, if you live on a ranch, if you have the resources, you're going to be a target. People are going to know that you have food if you've got fencing and fields and cows on them. So, people will target those animals. People will target your vegetable garden. A deer fence is not going to keep a hungry person out. It's just going to keep a deer out. So these are great books that will teach you, written by Rick Austin, the Survivalist gardener. He's got The Secret Greenhouse of Survival, The Secret Garden of Survival, and then The Secret Livestock of Survival. And in each of these books, he lays out, how these systems that he's created work and how you can keep them hidden. I mean, if you go out to their place and you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't know that he has a massively, a food forest with all of these animals and things going on around it, and it's just this massive resource of food. But it's more food than they could possibly eat. But you and I wouldn't know that. If you were hiking down the road, you would probably pass them by and end up going to the next farm. Now, the interesting thing about these books is that Rick didn't just focus on hiding his food, but he focused on using nature to grow his food. So when we're facing fertilizer shortages, when we're facing all of these different, restrictions to our ability to produce, he is utilizing the systems of nature to keep his food forest and keep his livestock productive. So the forest is producing the food that he needs for his livestock. It's overproducing for their needs. It's set up in such a way that parasites don't eat into all the food and bugs, because they've got a system of companionship between plants and other things to attract certain bugs, to deter certain bugs, and even when it comes down to plant diseases, he's put thought into every single aspect of the design of this thing. It is, architectural geniusness. I don't know where my Secret Garden of Survival book is, but I have the greenhouse and the livestock of survival. The greenhouse is going to also get into some things. I believe they use the greenhouse to heat up the water for their house. They live off grid. So with those 3 books, you just have this wealth of information. So in the event that you have to get out, you have to go somewhere, and then you have to start over again, or even on your own property now, if you wanted to start developing it into one of these things. His guides are a great way of learning how to set this stuff up and learning to basically turn your property into a hidden food forest, where, like I said, people aren't going to know to go and look. They're perfectly safe. If you didn't know where they were, which you don't, because I will never tell you, you wouldn't know it was there if you were walking by it. And that's the geniusness of the system that they have set up. And they have pigs, they have goats, they have chickens, they have rabbits, they have ducks, but you wouldn't even know all that was there. So I would highly suggest, if there's a particular author to look at, Rick Austin, the Survivalist Gardener, has already pretty much given you blueprints to everything you could possibly know about setting up a survival homestead that will not only withstand, the enemies of nature and the enemies of not having the proper fertilizers and pesticides and stuff, but it will also help you withstand prying eyes and people who are hungry and looking for food. And in the event that government rationing and price controls don't work, and they go as far as restrictions on what you can produce on your own property to help equalize the system, it also protects you from that. So you ultimately could not survive out in the wilderness or have a homestead the way that they do without really having the amount of knowledge that he's already put together for you in 3 very inclusive books of information. I mean, great stuff. And Rick's wife, for all the ladies out there, she has actually written several books, and a couple of them, I have to admit I don't have them all here right now, because some of them are in Shauna's library and I don't know where they would be. She might be reading them. But she's got books like What Could Possibly Go Wrong, and they're more like helping you be prepared for when you do have to move off grid. What could go wrong, and what she's learned from things that have gone wrong. She has books on cosmetics, and I'll try and find these books. I'll look them up and I'll put some links below for you. But natural cosmetics, ways of doing things on the homestead, so that you can continue to keep your hygiene up. She has a very different perspective on surviving, but they're all necessary things. I mean, hygiene is extremely important. So even for guys, I mean, we don't want to admit it, but those books are important to us. Learning how to make soaps, learning how to make toothpaste, maybe not the makeup part, but a lot of this stuff is important for everybody. So between Rick and Survivor Jane, there are a lot of just awesome resources of information out there for surviving in the most extreme conditions. And you don't necessarily want to be in a position where you have to survive in those extreme conditions, but in the event you are, you want to be prepared. And all their books are paperback, so pick and choose what you want. I would definitely suggest taking a look at their arsenal of books. So hopefully those will give you some ideas. There's one more book here that I find important. It's called the Holy Bible, King James Version. There is not a situation that I have not been able to figure out from this book. And so I would suggest it to everybody, but again, I realize that not everybody out there necessarily agrees with my perspective on it, So, you know, to each their own. I'm not going to force your hand at it, nor am I going to judge you. But I do think that, you know, any time that you are in a situation of survival, having some good stories of supply, perseverance, you name it, they're all in this book, and an inspiration to get you through just about anything. So anyway, if you have other ideas for other books, I think we need to start a discussion here and helping people figure out what they can do to prepare themselves in the event that this happens, because we are closer now than we ever have been. And I think if we get much closer, it's going to be a real possibility. So and then everybody's going to be buying this stuff, and then you're not going to be able to get your hands on it. So this is the point where you want to be a little bit ahead of the game all the time, even if you never are in the situation where you're never going to need one of these books, which I hope you're not. Then at least you've got them in your library, and you know, we even pull them out and read little things here and there when we're trying to figure out how to do something. So they're never a waste of money, but they're definitely a necessity in the event that you have to rely on them.